Hello there everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's Prickly Hedgehog here. Today we're going to take a quick look at the difference between the non-full fidelity modules such as the Su-27, we're going to focus on that as an example, and say the full fidelity modules like the A10C, the F-16, the F-18, and numerous rotary aircraft that we have, rotary wing aircraft, excuse me. What is the difference between these two things that I often refer to in the game, and is there any point in having non-full fidelity aircraft, the full clickable cockpits and all the rest of it? And it's a good question, because then you throw in the mix things like the F-86 Sabre or the MiG-15, the MiG-19. You've also got the World War II birds, which are not as sophisticated as, say, the F-18, which has very, very advanced avionics systems that are, recreated within the constraints of knowledge and the simulator, which are very, very involved and very, very in-depth and quite a steep learning curve. It's one thing to fly the jet, but it's another thing to get your head around all the other things that are going on. It's quite a complicated aircraft. So in some ways, when you look at the non-full fidelity aircraft like the Su-27, and again we're going to focus on that one just for comparative purposes, again, is there a value in picking up some of these aircraft just for giggles? And I think there is, for those who wish to fly and have the jet experience, and some of the nuances of that particular aircraft without necessarily being bogged down or overwhelmed with the information that is available in some of the full fidelity modules. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's take a little look here at the Su-27, which, as I said, is one of my... did I say that? No, this is one of my favorite aircraft, and the reason I like it is there's a sort of visceral beauty about the Su-27, even compared with other aircraft like the F-16, the F-18, and the F-15. I think the Su-27 is, for my mind, one of the more attractive aircraft in the game. The Russians are generally not renowned for producing the most attractive aircraft. And certainly their vehicles and other things are not. We don't, rate them in the West so much. But there's an exception here. This is a really, really attractive aircraft. Like I said, it's got a visceral beauty. There's a little bit of a menacing posture about the aircraft, which I really enjoy. And I think in part you've got the twin tails, of course, and you've got this cool wing structure. The air intakes are, of course, underneath the aircraft, and this was purposely done, as opposed to, say, the F-14 and the F-15, which has the side-by-side configuration on the fuselage. These engines are venting, if you like, or intaking air from underneath the airframe, which has pitfalls. But, you've got that structure. But then I think what I really like about the aircraft is the arching hump, if you like, of the neck. It's sort of got almost like a bird-like structure, and it's similar a little bit to the Concorde with the pointed nose when it's not set up for supersonic flight. You've got this sort of angular, elongated neck of this structure, which I think is quite appealing. And again, it creates a very unique shape among aircraft, which is not, seen in any other jet fighter that I can think of off the top of my head. And correct me if I'm wrong. There's plenty of very, very interesting aircraft over the years, but this is one of the more capable aircraft, and certainly one of the more interesting ones, certainly one of the more successful ones too, that the Russians have produced in the last 40 years. So the history of the aircraft, it was really designed as a counterpoint to the F-15 that the US was producing, which really is one of the more powerful aircraft around today. The F-15 has proven itself as a very capable multi-role fighter, very fast aircraft. It's capable of quite high ceilings in terms of its flight parameters, and again, it's proven to be a very, very capable fighter, used by at least a couple of different air forces around the world, including the Israelis, and of course it's been a stalwart of the United States Air Force for some time. Not probably reduced in quite as much numbers as the F-16, which is a little bit cheaper and also a very, very capable aircraft, but the Su-27 was designed to kind of counteract the threat that the F-15 posed during the early to mid 70s when that program was being developed, and a lot of flight records were created by the F-15 initially. Now by the mid 80s, the Su-27 was really starting to come to fruition. They went through quite a lot of design changes, quite a lot of parameter problems. One of the issues they had was oscillation of the airframe, which caused one aircraft to disintegrate mid-flight during a supersonic test, killed the test pilot. Unfortunately, the aircraft simply broke up and was unrecoverable. The pilot didn't even have a chance to eject or react to what had happened. So they started looking at the airframe and some of its problems. So they had to fix the width of the tail, and they did a lot of stuff with the wings, and they actually ended up redesigning that neck thing that I was talking about before, redesigning that structure to offset some of the issues that they had with the aircraft. Quite high, it's got a very decent thrust to weight ratio. I forget off the top of my head what it was. During the mid-80s, they did some test runs with it. They were looking for world record flights for speed and to altitude, and outdid the F-15. I think they beat it by about 4 seconds to ceiling altitude. But they did a lot of modifications, removed a lot of stuff like that. So the aircraft, I think, at that time had a thrust ratio in excess of 2. So very, very powerful. But they had to do things like there was so much thrust that the brakes actually couldn't hold the aircraft in place. So they had to hook it up to a tractor, which released the hook at a certain point. Once they'd reached their maximum thrust, so the aircraft could take off. So there's a lot of different little things. These aren't really normal parameters. The aircraft doesn't typically operate that way with load, so on and so forth. But the Su-27 basically really has proved itself as a very, very competent fighter. And then you've got the fantastic Cobra maneuver and all these different things. And it's, like I said, a very maneuverable aircraft. It's a 9G aircraft, so it matches the F-16 in that sense. Operates quite well at low speed as well. So in the game, it's very, very pointy, quite challenging a little bit to fly because it doesn't have an auto trim. You have to hit that yourself and adjust that regularly. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge to fly. Once it's set up, it's cool. You can just happily fly along, and you've got a very nice sense of the aircraft's handling characteristic, but it does get out of whack a little bit, and you do have to be kind of cognizant of that as you move it around in the game. So yeah, when you get into this aircraft, you've got a nice sense of its size and weight. I really like what it does on the ground. It's a little bit twitchy on takeoff, and the aircraft does move around quite easily. You do have to be careful too that you don't over speed the aircraft on the ground, because you can actually burst the tires. I've done that a couple of times, not pulling up on the stick enough to get it launched. But once it's up in the air and you're flying around, it's actually quite a lot of fun. It's a very entertaining aircraft, and you've got actually quite a lot of hard points, so you can carry quite a lot of weapons. It is capable of both air interdiction and also limited ground attack roll as well. It's not going to carry as much munitions as, say, the F-18 and perhaps even the F-16. But it's a little bit limited, remember, too. This is a part of you can buy it as part of a package for the Flaming Cliffs 3, or you can purchase it as a separate download, and either way it's worth picking up. The F-15C similarly too. So it's nice comparing, these different aircraft just to sort of see what you get. But I really recommend it if you haven't purchased any of the separate modules, just for price point reasons, or you're not sure what to start with. This is a nice compromise. It's not too expensive to start off with, and it gives you kind of a good sense of what it's like to really pilot a high-performance jet. Now, as I said before, you're not getting all of the complex avionics systems that you get with the full fidelity modules. The cockpit is largely, you're not going to be clicking any of the buttons in there. It is able to be set up with all the controls via the keyboard, or you can map them all to your mouse. Obviously, you don't have, again, a whole lot of stuff compared to the full fidelity modules, which takes some of the workload off you as well. You can kind of concentrate on the flying. You don't have to be worried about some of these other systems to get them up and ready. Which does limit, I guess, to some extent, the capacity of your piloting ability to do things with the aircraft in terms of the avionics packages and the weapon systems. But it's a good place to start so that you're not overloaded with all this extra information and things aren't working and you have to go back and read the manual again to try to figure out how to use some of these things, simply just to turn it on sometimes, whereas you can just map on the controls, the start buttons, and away you go. So let's have a little break here and we'll see what WAG says about the aircraft, and we'll watch it take off and have a little look at it in flight.
Welcome to the Su-27 Flanker. The Flanker is one of the most dominant air superiority fighters in modern-day combat aviation. Equipped with powerful sensors, weapons, and a data link, it is a match for any aircraft you may encounter in DCS World. In addition to its air-to-air capabilities, it can also perform a secondary ground strike role with unguided bombs and rockets. Before we start to blow things up though, let's first learn how to start up this bird and taxi to the runway. The first thing I'll ask you to do is turn on the electrical power by pressing right shift and L. With the electrical power now engaged, you can see that the heads-up display, or HUD, comes to life, as well as many instruments and cockpit lights. Before moving the aircraft, make sure that more than 3 minutes have elapsed in order to let the horizontal situation indicator gyro to align properly. Now that we have power, let's turn on the navigation lights by pressing right, Control, and L. Next, let's close the canopy by pressing left, Control, and C. Our next step is to start our two engines. Before you do so, make sure your throttle controller has a 0 power setting. Start the left engine by pressing right, Alt, and Home. With the left engine started, press right, Control, and Home to start the right engine. In the center of your front dash is the RPM engine gauge with 2 needles. When an engine is being started, one of the 2 green lights below the engine temperature gauge will light. Once the light turns off, it indicates the engine is ready for operation. In the lower left corner of the dash is an aircraft symbol that indicates the status of your flaps, landing gear, and air brake. Lower your flaps to the takeoff position by pressing left shift and F. We're now ready to taxi, so slowly increase the throttles by moving your throttle control forward or pressing page up. To reduce throttle, use your throttle controller or press page down. To use the wheel brakes, press W. Start rolling forward and turn to the left of the taxiway ahead. Press Z to steer left and press X to steer right.
Ассистент, разрешаю руление на полосу 8.
You're now heading in the right direction. Keep your taxi speed around 20 kilometers per hour as indicated in the top left corner of the HUD. As you taxi, use small, smooth rudder corrections to keep you aligned on the center of the taxiway. At the fork, hang a right to reach the runway. As we taxi, you can go to external view by pressing F2 and return to the cockpit by pressing F1. You can zoom in and out using the keypad star and / keys. Rotate the views using the keypad directional keys. We've now reached the runway threshold. Taxi onto the runway to the right and align yourself down the length of it. Once aligned down the runway, increase the thrust of both engines to maximum and use gentle inputs of the rudders to keep you tracking down the center line. Increase speed to 250 kilometers per hour, and then gently pull back on the controller to allow the aircraft to fly itself off the runway. With positive climb established, raise the landing gear by pressing G. In the top right corner of the HUD is your altitude in meters. Between the altitude and speed indication is your heading tape. In the center of the HUD is the pitch and roll indication, and along the right side of the HUD is your pitch ladder and vertical velocity indication. Go ahead and raise the flaps by pressing left control and F. This concludes this lesson on starting up the Su-27, taxiing, and taking off. You can end the lesson now by pressing the escape key.
All right, well, there you get the idea of just how straightforward it is with the non-full fidelity modules, how quick it is and easy it is to get them up and running and get up and flying. So it's a good starting point for those people that are, a little overwhelmed by the full fidelity modules and maybe intimidated by the amount of learning that is required. As I've said in the past, the NATOPS flight manual for the F-14B, for example, is about 1,000 pages, and most of it is applicable to the F-14B and Heat Blur's rendition of that particular aircraft in the game. So we're talking a lot more layers of sophistication and depth of information to process, which is, again, an intimidating factor for a lot of people that just want to get in the game and fly around. So this is a nice compromise. Again, I stress it is a good compromise for those wanting that aircraft fighter jet experience without all the complexity and the layers of detail that come with the full fidelity modules. So I hope that makes some sense. We won't go through and look in complexity or depth at the F-14 or some of these other full fidelity modules by way of comparison. There's other videos out there, and I have other examples of that, and maybe we will revisit that at another stage. I don't want to make this video any longer than it already is, just from an interest point of view and just from brevity and common sense. But I hope this gives you a broad overview of the kinds of things that I'm looking at. I will bring you more footage of the Su-27, perhaps in some combat situations. I've been trying to do some recording of that recently, but it's been a long time since I played it. So I was playing last night, and I suddenly realized all my controls weren't mapped, and I was having trouble shooting anything down when the trigger isn't set up properly, and I got shot down instead because I'm fluffing around trying to fix things mid-flight, which is not a good idea. But we will bring you some footage of that as time allows, and just to kind of show you how the aircraft functions in a combat environment and how it is less stressful to fly in that sense, because you've just got a little bit less to worry about, because a lot of the stuff is set up kind of for you in a limited capacity and the nature of that particular aircraft under the guise that it is. So you get what I'm saying. All right, well, thank you very much for tuning in again. I hope this video was at least helpful as a starting point for whether or not you want to go for if you're in one of those limbo modes where you're not sure what to start with. This is a good aircraft to start with and get into. Obviously, the F-16C is going to be very, very similar, slightly different handling characteristics, very fast aircraft, but again, another good starting point if you're, again, trying to figure out what you want to start off with in DCS World, and you don't want to have buyer's remorse by picking up an aircraft that is too time consuming and expensive and potentially frustrating to get to grips with. All right, that's enough waffle. Thanks, guys. Prickly Hedgehog out. We'll see you out there. Stay flying. Take care.